Dearest listeners, one must confess that this author has witnessed many a transformation in her years observing the ton, but none quite so remarkable as that of His Grace, the Duke of Thornbury. Today, your humble chronicler brings you the most devastating tale of redemption through love's unexpected mercy. A story of a libertine duke, a sacrificial bride, and the unexpected passion that transformed them both. If you find yourself enchanted by tales of scandalous dukes and the women who tamed them, do press that like button and subscribe for more chronicles from your devoted Lady Ravenswood. Now then, let us not rush, for the best scandals, like the finest wine, must be savored properly. Maximilian Thornbury, 5th Duke of Thornbury, had become precisely what his late father intended: a man devoid of softness, stripped of sentiment, and utterly impervious to the tender emotions that His Grace believed had made his beloved Duchess weak unto death. This author has it on good authority that young Max witnessed his mother's final breath at merely 8 years of age, watching her slip away whilst calling for a husband who deemed her suffering beneath his notice. What followed, gentle listeners, was an education in cruelty that would make even this author's hardened heart weep. The Duke, may his soul find no peace, determined that his heir would never suffer such vulnerability again. No nurses to comfort nightmares, no tutors to encourage dreams, no companions to foster friendship. Only discipline, duty, and the constant reminder that a Thornbury bends to no weakness, especially that most treacherous weakness of all, love. One can only imagine how such a childhood might shape a man. By his 21st year, Maximilian had cultivated a reputation that would make even the most hardened rake blush. This author observed him during those early years, a beautiful devil stalking through ballrooms, collecting hearts like trophies before discarding them with the same cold efficiency his father had taught him. The transformation from wounded boy to ruthless man had been methodical and complete. At Eton, young Max learned that vulnerability invited cruelty, so he became the one others feared. This author has it from reliable sources that he would arrive at lessons precisely on time, complete his work with mechanical perfection, and depart without forming a single friendship that might expose him to the pain of betrayal or loss. At Oxford, he discovered that emotional detachment could be worn like armor, protecting him from disappointment whilst allowing him to wound others before they could wound him. Fellow students learned to avoid attempting intimacy with the Duke's heir, not because he was cruel precisely, but because conversing with him was rather like trying to embrace a marble statue, beautiful to behold, impressive in its craftsmanship, but utterly incapable of returning warmth. By the time he inherited his father's title at 25, he had perfected the art of feeling nothing at all. This author recalls the whispered conversations amongst the Ton's matrons during those years. They spoke of how the Duke would arrive at balls precisely 1 hour after the opening, survey the available young ladies with the cold assessment of a horse breeder examining stock, dance exactly twice with different partners to avoid raising expectations, and depart without a backward glance. Mothers ceased presenting their daughters to him after the infamous incident where he publicly declared marriage a business transaction best concluded without the inconvenience of sentiment. Lady Pembroke, whose daughter had been among those dismissed so callously, was heard to remark that the Duke possessed all the warmth of a December morning in the Scottish Highlands. Yet beneath that carefully constructed facade, gentle listeners, lived a man slowly dying of spiritual starvation. This author had occasion to observe him during quieter moments, standing alone on terraces whilst gaiety swirled within, his fingers drumming restlessly against balustrades as if searching for something he could not name. She noted how he would watch families with the intensity of a scholar studying ancient texts, his jaw tightening whenever children laughed in their father's arms or wives gazed upon their husbands with obvious affection. Most tellingly, he began retiring early from festivities that once might have brought him pleasure, claiming boredom, but wearing the expression of a man fleeing something he dared not confront. This author suspected even then that his father's lessons had succeeded too well. In teaching him to avoid pain, they had rendered him incapable of experiencing its opposite. But oh, gentle listeners, how the mighty do fall when Venus strikes her arrow true. For it was not in the gilded halls of Mayfair that our Duke met his first genuine passion, but in the shadowed corners of Mrs. Whitmore's establishment, that infamous house of pleasure where London's most distinguished gentlemen sought what their proper wives could never provide. Mrs. Whitmore herself was a woman of considerable cunning, who understood that men of quality required more than mere physical gratification. Her establishment offered the illusion of romance alongside its more carnal pleasures. Candlelit dinners, intimate conversations, the pretense that one's chosen companion genuinely desired one's company, rather than merely one's coin. The house occupied a discreet mansion in a neighborhood respectable enough that gentlemen might visit without complete loss of reputation, yet removed enough from Mayfair that wives need never accidentally encounter evidence of their husbands' diversions. This author has learned from reliable sources that the Duke first visited the establishment on a dare from Lord Pemberton, who had grown weary of his friend's superior attitude toward the pleasures that consumed other men. What was intended as a single evening's entertainment became something far more dangerous when the Duke encountered Helena Rosebottom. Helena Rosebottom, though that was hardly her given name, possessed the sort of sultry beauty that could make bishops question their vows. Rather than the obvious charms one might expect from her profession, she radiated an almost feline grace that suggested depths of mystery beneath surface allure. Her figure was generous without being vulgar, her manners sophisticated without seeming calculated, and her voice carried the smoky quality of expensive whiskey sipped by firelight. This author must pause to illuminate Helena's background more fully, for she was no simple strumpet, but rather a woman of considerable cunning who understood power in all its forms. Born Helena Blackwood to a country vicar, she had received an education that included literature, music, and enough French to charm gentlemen who fancied themselves sophisticated. When her father's gambling debts and subsequent suicide forced her from respectability into Mrs. Whitmore's care, she had adapted to her circumstances with the pragmatic grace of a woman determined not merely to survive, but to prosper. What made Helena dangerous, and what ultimately ensnared our Duke so completely, was her intelligence. She studied her clients with the dedication of a natural philosopher, learning precisely which words would make them feel powerful, which touches would convince them they were desired for themselves rather than their wealth, which vulnerabilities could be exploited to ensure continued patronage. With lesser men, she played obvious games of flattery and submission. With Maximilian, she recognized immediately that she faced a more complex challenge. Here was a man who had been starved of genuine affection, yet trained to distrust it completely. Helena's masterstroke was to offer him not fawning admiration, which his suspicions would have rejected, but rather intellectual companionship seasoned with carefully calibrated indifference. She would debate philosophy with him, challenge his more cynical observations, and occasionally withdraw her attention just enough to make him pursue her favor. For 3 years, our Duke visited her exclusively, showering her with jewels that could purchase estates and devotion that this author suspects surprised even himself. He began declining social invitations, avoiding the marriage mart entirely, content to lose himself in Helena's embraces, and the illusion that such purchased affection might fill the void where his heart should have been. During those years, Helena became his confessor as well as his lover. This author understands that in the intimate darkness of her chambers, the Duke revealed wounds he had shown no other living soul. The memory of his mother's final gasps, the sound of his father's belt against tender skin, the crushing loneliness of a childhood spent learning that love was weakness. Helena listened with seeming sympathy, offered comfort with apparent sincerity, and gradually convinced him that she alone understood his true nature. What the Duke failed to recognize, though this author observed it clearly enough, was that Helena's affections were as carefully calculated as a banker's ledger. She noted which stories brought moisture to his eyes, so she might summon them again when she needed his generosity renewed. She memorized which touches made him vulnerable so she could deploy them when her position required reinforcing. She loved him, certainly, but in the way one might love a beautiful racehorse that provided both excitement and profitable returns. The tragedy, gentle listeners, was that the Duke's feelings had evolved beyond mere infatuation into something approaching genuine devotion. This author witnessed him during social occasions, his attention wandering like a compass, seeking its true north, clearly longing to return to Helena's side. He spoke of her intelligence with the reverence other men reserved for discussions of fine art, praised her understanding as if she were some oracle of feminine wisdom, and described her capacity for passion in terms that made the young ladies of the Ton seem insipid by comparison. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Maximilian Thornberry believed himself truly loved for who he was rather than what he possessed. The irony, which this author perceived but he could not, was that Helena's performance was so complete precisely because it was performance. She gave him what he needed to hear rather than what she genuinely felt, and in doing so, created an addiction more powerful than any opium den could provide. Meanwhile, in the humble drawing room of a failing tea merchant in Cheapside, another drama was unfolding with equal desperation. Mr. Josiah Whitmore, distant relation to the brothel keeper, though decent enough to shudder at the connection, faced the sort of ruin that turns honorable men into broken shells, shuffling through debtors' courts. This author has learned the particulars of Mr. Whitmore's downfall, and they paint a picture of a man whose only crime was trusting too readily in the goodness of others. He had invested his wife's inheritance, the entirety of their family's security, in what seemed a certain venture, importing exotic teas from the Orient through a gentleman who claimed intimate connections with the East India Company and personal friendship with several governors of trading posts. The gentleman in question, one Mr. Aldrich Pemberton, cousin to the Lord Pemberton whose loose tongue had once earned him the Duke's displeasure, proved to be nothing more than an elaborate fraud who had been systematically fleecing London's merchant class for months. When the scheme collapsed, it took with it not merely the Whitmores' modest fortune, but the savings of a dozen families who had trusted in Mr. Whitmore's reputation for honest dealing. The Whitmore household, once comfortable if not luxurious, began its slow descent into genteel poverty with the sort of careful dignity that breaks hearts more thoroughly than any dramatic collapse might do. Servants were dismissed one by one, each parting accompanied by tears and promises to recall them when circumstances improved. Eventually, only old Mrs. Henley remained, staying without wages from loyalty to the family she had served since Aurelia's birth, and a stubborn determination that the household should maintain some vestige of proper order. The furniture gradually disappeared. First, the ornamental pieces that had been wedding gifts, then items of practical necessity, until only the barest essentials remained to maintain the illusion that the Whitmores remained respectable members of the merchant class. This author observed Aurelia during those trying months, noting how she managed each loss with the sort of quiet grace that transformed practical necessities into acts of almost spiritual acceptance. Aurelia watched her father's decline with the sort of helpless anguish that ages young hearts prematurely. She took over the household management entirely, stretching every penny until it surrendered its last value, mending clothing until the patches required patches of their own, and maintaining a cheerful facade that fooled no one but perhaps herself. This author has it from Mrs. Henley that many nights, the poor girl could be heard moving quietly through the house, checking locks and counting candles with the careful attention of one who understands that every small economy might mean the difference between respectability and the workhouse. His daughter Aurelia, 22, and possessed of the sort of quiet beauty that blooms in adversity rather than privilege, had spent her youth managing household accounts and caring for younger siblings, whilst her father chased increasingly desperate business ventures. She possessed what this author considers the rarest quality in our age: genuine contentment with simplicity that arose not from ignorance of finer things, but from understanding their true value. The education she had received before their circumstances changed had been thorough enough to include French, Italian, and a smattering of Latin, accomplishments that seemed mockingly useless when one's primary concerns became stretching soup bones into multiple meals and darning stockings by candlelight to save precious lamp oil. Yet Aurelia possessed the sort of resilient spirit that finds purpose even in reduced circumstances, discovering that adversity had taught her lessons about human nature that no governess could have provided. She began offering lessons to the neighborhood children, earning a few precious shillings whilst maintaining the pretense that she did so from charitable inclination rather than desperate necessity. This author observed her during those difficult months, walking to her pupils' homes with the sort of determined grace that suggested she had found a way to transform necessity into genuine vocation. Most remarkably, poverty had refined rather than coarsened her character. Where other young ladies might have grown bitter at seeing their expectations diminished, or grasping in their desperation to escape reduced circumstances, Aurelia seemed to develop an almost ethereal detachment from material concerns. She moved through her diminished world with quiet grace, finding genuine pleasure in sunset walks through Hyde Park, free entertainment being the only sort available to her, and deep satisfaction in the small domestic skills that kept her family from complete destitution. This author noted how Aurelia's reduced circumstances had stripped away the artificial accomplishments that society demanded of young ladies, revealing the genuine woman beneath. Without money for fashionable gowns, she learned to find beauty in simple muslin worn with dignity. Without access to elaborate entertainments, she discovered the pleasure of conversation with Mrs. Henley about herbs and household management, or with her pupils about the magical worlds that opened through reading. Most telling of all, she had developed what this author recognized as true compassion, not the charitable condescension of those who give from surplus, but the understanding that comes from personal experience of want. She knew exactly how much a shilling meant to a family choosing between coal and candles, understood the pride that made accepting charity more painful than enduring cold, and possessed the wisdom to offer help in ways that preserved dignity rather than highlighting desperation. When the Duke's man of business approached with an offer that seemed salvation itself, marriage to his grace in exchange for clearing all debts and providing a generous settlement, poor Mr. Whitmore wept with relief. That his daughter would be sacrificed to the appetites of London's most notorious libertine seemed a small price for his family's survival, particularly when the alternative was watching them all slide into destitution that might kill them as surely as any disease. The negotiations were conducted with the same cold efficiency that the Duke applied to all his business dealings. A settlement that would clear the Whitmore debts entirely, provide comfortably for Aurelia's father and younger siblings in perpetuity, and establish a modest household fund that would ensure their respectability for life. A marriage contract that specified the Duke's obligations, financial support, social position, adequate housing, and hers, availability for conjugal duties, maintenance of household dignity, production of an heir. No mention was made of affection, companionship, or any of those tender emotions that transform legal arrangements into true marriages. This author must record the particularly heartbreaking detail that Mr. Whitmore's relief at his family's salvation was matched only by his anguish at the price. He had raised Aurelia to expect love in marriage, having witnessed firsthand how devotion had transformed his own modest union with her mother into something approaching paradise. To deliver his daughter into an arrangement that promised security, but not affection, felt like betraying every lesson he had tried to teach her about the worth of hearts over fortunes. Aurelia received the news of her engagement whilst mending her father's only remaining decent shirt by the light of a single candle. This author can scarcely imagine the thoughts that must have raced through her mind. Relief at her family's salvation, warring with terror at her own fate, gratitude for escape from poverty, battling dread of a loveless future with a man whose reputation for coldness exceeded even his fame for debauchery. Yet this author observed something remarkable in Aurelia's response to her changed circumstances. Rather than despair or resentment, she seemed to approach her upcoming marriage with the same quiet determination that had carried her through months of genteel poverty. If she was to be the Duke's wife in name only, she would at least fulfill that role with dignity. If her heart was to remain unengaged, she would ensure that her conduct brought no shame to the family name she was soon to bear. This author will never forget the morning Aurelia first entered Thornbury House as its new duchess. Dressed in the finest gown money could purchase, yet looking rather like a robin attempting to wear peacock feathers, she moved through those magnificent halls with the careful grace of one who knows herself to be utterly out of place. The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath during that first meeting. Thornbury House, with its soaring ceilings and priceless artwork, had remained frozen in time since the previous Duchess's death. Dust sheets covered furniture in rooms that had once hosted glittering soirees. Gardens that had been the envy of London lay neglected and overgrown, their geometric perfection surrendering to the wild beauty of unchecked growth. The very walls seemed to exhale loneliness and long-accumulated grief. The Duke, having arrived mere hours earlier from what he believed was ending his arrangement with Helena, though he knew not yet how completely she had already ended their arrangement with him, encountered his bride in the marble foyer, beneath a portrait of his mother that had watched over 15 years of masculine solitude. One must confess, the sight that met both their eyes was rather like watching Greek fire meet morning dew. She gazed upon him with something between wonder and terror, recognizing the face she had seen in countless scandal sheets, but somehow unprepared for the raw masculine presence of him in flesh. Her hands, this author noted, trembled slightly as she attempted a curtsy that spoke more of nervous grace than practiced elegance. He, meanwhile, observed her with the detached assessment one might give a piece of furniture delivered for inspection, noting that she was neither beautiful enough to inspire immediate desire nor plain enough to excuse complete indifference, but rather possessed of that troubling middle ground that might require actual attention to properly appreciate. The Duke possessed the sort of devastating handsomeness that seemed almost unfair in its abundance. Tall and broad-shouldered, with hair the rich brown of coffee beans roasted over open flame, and eyes the color of pewter clouds, heavy with unspent rain, he moved with the predatory grace of a man accustomed to having others step aside for his passage. Yet this author noted something almost hollow in his beauty, as if all that physical magnificence concealed an essential emptiness that no amount of pleasure had managed to fill. Aurelia, by contrast, embodied a softer sort of appeal that revealed itself gradually rather than demanding immediate notice. Neither petite nor statuesque, neither classically beautiful nor strikingly exotic, she possessed instead that rarest quality, genuine sweetness that seemed to emanate from within rather than being artfully applied like cosmetics. Her brown hair caught amber highlights when sunlight touched it. Her hazel eyes reflected whatever emotions she felt with the dangerous honesty of still water, and her figure, whilst modest, suggested the sort of gentle curves that might comfort a man rather than merely inflame him. What struck this author most powerfully was the quality of stillness both possessed. Not the emptiness of boredom or the vacancy of simple minds, but the profound quiet of two people who had learned to find peace within themselves because the world had offered them precious little elsewhere. In that moment of first meeting, they recognized something in each other. Not love, which requires time to grow, but rather the possibility of understanding between two souls who had learned to expect little from life, yet somehow retained hope for something better. What followed, dearest listeners, was perhaps the most exquisite torture this author has ever witnessed. For you see, the Duke had expected his arranged bride to be either a trembling mouse he could ignore entirely, or a grasping social climber seeking to exploit his title. Aurelia proved to be something far more dangerous, a woman whose very lack of demands made her impossible to dismiss. The first weeks of their marriage unfolded like a careful dance between two people determined not to step upon each other's feet. The Duke, having installed his bride in the Duchess's traditional chambers, rooms that had remained untouched since his mother's death, proceeded to live exactly as he had before her arrival, rising late, departing for his club without explanation, returning at all hours without apology. He spoke to her only when necessity demanded, treated her with the sort of distant courtesy one might show a respected governess, and made it abundantly clear that her presence in his life was purely functional. This author observed him during those early weeks, noting how his established routines began to develop curious irregularities. His morning rides, once precisely timed, became erratic affairs where he might gallop for hours through Hyde Park, as if attempting to outrun his own thoughts. His evenings at his club, traditionally spent in comfortable masculine solitude, now found him distracted and sharp-tempered, snapping at servants and abandoning card games mid-hand without explanation. Most tellingly, he began what Mrs. Whitmore described as reconnaissance missions through his own house, wandering corridors at odd hours, pausing outside doors where Aurelia might be found, lingering in rooms she had recently vacated as if something in the air might explain the subtle changes her presence had wrought. When questioned about these perambulations, he claimed to be inspecting household management, though this author suspects he was actually attempting to understand how one quiet woman had managed to make his vast, empty house feel somehow inhabited. Aurelia, for her part, navigated her new circumstances with the quiet dignity of one who had learned to find grace in difficult situations. She explored her magnificent new home with wonder but without presumption, treating the priceless artwork and furnishings with the reverence of a museum visitor rather than the familiarity of an owner. When Mrs. Whitmore offered to show her the household accounts, Aurelia requested instead to learn the servants' names, their families' circumstances, and the particular challenges they faced in maintaining such a large establishment. This author finds it telling that whilst the Duke avoided his wife's company, he began asking casual questions about her activities with the sort of carefully disguised interest that would have been amusing had it not been so poignant. Did her Grace require anything for her comfort? Had she expressed preferences regarding meals? Was she satisfied with her accommodations? Had she made any requests for changes to household routines? Mrs. Whitmore, no fool despite her matronly appearance, recognized these inquiries for what they were: the desperate curiosity of a man fighting his own growing interest in a woman he had convinced himself he should not notice. She began providing detailed reports that went far beyond what the Duke had actually asked for, describing how her Grace spent her mornings reading in the morning room, her afternoons walking in the neglected gardens, her evenings at the pianoforte playing melodies that seemed to drift through the house like gentle spirits. She asked for nothing beyond basic courtesy, made no demands upon his time, his attention, or his fortune beyond what was necessary for household management. When he gruffly informed her that she was welcome to redecorate as she pleased, she thanked him politely and changed precisely nothing, explaining that she found the house beautiful as it was and would not presume to alter arrangements that held sentimental value. When he told her she needn't wait upon his dining schedule, she simply took her meals at sensible hours and never complained of his absence, though Mrs. Whitmore reported that she often prepared small plates that remained untouched, as if hoping he might join her even when experience suggested otherwise. The Duke's confusion grew daily, manifesting in behaviors that would have amused this author had they not revealed such profound emotional upheaval. This author watched him during social functions, noting how his eyes would search crowds as if seeking something he could not name, how conversations that once engaged him now seemed to require tremendous effort to follow, how he had begun declining invitations to entertainments he had previously enjoyed. His previous diversions, gaming, drinking, the company of fellow rakes, began to lose their appeal when compared to the inexplicable peace that seemed to emanate from his wife's very presence. He found himself curious about her thoughts on books he discovered her reading, intrigued by her gentle laughter echoing from distant rooms like music he had never learned to appreciate, and inexplicably irritated when other gentlemen inquired too closely about his new duchess's welfare or accomplishments. This author watched with growing fascination as such gentle indifference began to unnerve a man accustomed to either fawning admiration or calculated seduction. The Duke found himself lingering in doorways, hoping to catch glimpses of his wife arranging flowers with the sort of instinctive artistry that transformed simple wildflowers into displays worthy of royal gardens. He began timing his entries to coincide with her presence, though he would have died rather than admit to such carefully orchestrated coincidences. One particularly telling incident occurred when Lord Pemberton, that notorious gossip, made some jest about arranged marriages being akin to purchasing livestock at Tattersall's. The Duke's response was so swift and savage that the entire club fell silent, and Pemberton required a full week to recover his courage sufficiently to appear in public again. When pressed about his violent reaction, the Duke could offer no explanation beyond claiming that he would not tolerate disrespect toward any lady of his acquaintance, though this author suspected even he did not understand why his wife's honor had become so precious to him. Poor Aurelia, meanwhile, suffered the exquisite agony of finding herself married to the most compelling man she had ever encountered, whilst knowing herself to be nothing more than a convenient solution to his need for an heir and social respectability. She observed his restless prowls through their shared spaces with the careful attention of one who has learned to read subtle signs of mood and inclination, noted the way his eyes would darken when they encountered her unexpectedly, and felt her own treacherous heart begin to harbor hopes she dared not name. The household staff, wise in the ways of love, though perhaps unschooled in its complexities, began to notice small changes in both master and mistress that spoke of a careful courtship neither was prepared to acknowledge. His Grace's morning rides grew longer and more punishing, as if he sought to exhaust himself before returning to face another day of fighting his growing fascination with his wife. Her Grace's embroidery grew more elaborate, her hours at the pianoforte more frequent and intense, as if she too sought distraction from thoughts that threatened her carefully maintained composure. This author must note here the particularly cruel irony that both husband and wife had begun to discover in each other exactly what their hearts craved most. Yet both remained convinced that such feelings could never be reciprocated. The Duke believed his wife too pure and innocent to desire a man of his corrupted nature, too gentle to find attraction in someone who had lived as he had lived. Aurelia believed herself too plain and common to capture the lasting interest of a man who had known London's most beautiful courtesans, too practical to inspire the sort of romantic passion she had read about in novels. The turning point came, as such moments often do, through the smallest gesture. This author has it from Mrs. Whitmore that one evening, the Duke discovered Aurelia in his private study, having fallen asleep whilst reading his collection of philosophical treatises. Rather than wake her immediately, he spent nearly an hour simply observing her in the firelight, noting details that daylight encounters had not revealed. The book that had tumbled from her relaxed fingers was Rousseau's Discourse on Inequality, hardly the sort of light reading one might expect from a merchant's daughter, yet she had been taking careful notes in the margins, with observations that revealed a mind both sharp and surprisingly radical in its sympathies. This author understands that the Duke read several of her annotations and found himself genuinely impressed by insights that challenged his own cynical worldview, whilst revealing a compassionate intelligence he had not suspected. When she stirred and found him there, the air between them fairly crackled with unspoken longing. This author understands that he very nearly kissed her then. Indeed, his face had drawn close enough that she could feel his breath upon her lips, could see the way candlelight caught the silver flecks in his gray eyes, before some last vestige of his practiced indifference made him withdraw with an apology that satisfied neither of them. The aftermath of that near kiss haunted them both with the persistence of an unfinished symphony that demands resolution. Aurelia began to wonder if she had imagined the hunger she thought she had glimpsed in her husband's eyes, the way his hands had trembled slightly as he helped her to her feet, the husky quality that had entered his voice when he murmured her name like a prayer he had not known he was capable of offering. The Duke, meanwhile, found himself tormented by memories of how soft her skin had felt beneath his fingertips when he brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, how her lips had parted in unconscious invitation, how every instinct had screamed at him to claim what was legally his yet felt impossibly precious and fragile. But oh, gentle listeners, the heart is a persistent hunter, and love will find its quarry no matter how cleverly one attempts to hide. The breakthrough came during one of those afternoon thunderstorms that turn London skies the color of tarnished silver and send proper ladies scurrying for cover. The Duke, returning early from a club gathering that had failed to hold his interest, discovered Aurelia in the conservatory, that forgotten sanctuary his father had ordered sealed after his mother's death. Standing perfectly still amongst his mother's abandoned rose bushes, her face tilted upward to catch the sound of rain upon glass, she seemed to commune with spirits only she could perceive. The conservatory had been locked for 15 years, its exotic plants dying slowly from neglect until only the hardiest roses remained to mark where beauty had once flourished. The Duke's mother had spent countless hours there, cultivating not merely flowers, but a sanctuary where she could escape the increasingly oppressive atmosphere of her marriage to a man who viewed her gentle nature as a character flaw requiring constant correction. This author has learned from old servants that young Maximilian had begged to visit his mother's flowers after her death, had pressed his small face against locked glass doors until his breath fogged the panes, had wept for access to the only place where her presence still lingered like perfume in an empty bottle. His father's response had been swift and brutal, a beating administered with the riding crop that left scars both visible and otherwise, accompanied by a promise that any further display of such sentiment would result in the conservatory's complete destruction. Standing there 15 years later, watching his wife commune with ghosts he had been forbidden to mourn, the Duke felt something crack open within his chest like ice breaking under spring warmth. This author suspects that in that moment, he saw not merely Aurelia swaying to phantom music, but his mother as she had been in life, joyful, alive, unafraid to feel deeply despite the costs such feeling might demand. This author has learned that Aurelia confessed then, thinking herself alone, that the storm reminded her of her childhood when she would dance in the garden whilst her mother played piano. How those moments of simple joy had sustained her through the recent years of hardship. The vulnerability in her voice, the unconscious grace of her movements as she swayed to music only she could hear, the way rainlight played across her upturned face. Such beauty would have moved stones to weep, and it accomplished something far more remarkable in the Duke's carefully guarded heart. When she realized his presence, the embarrassment that flooded her cheeks only served to make her more enchanting. But this author suspects that in that moment, watching her attempt to compose herself whilst surrounded by the ghosts of his happier past, something fundamental shifted within the Duke's carefully constructed defenses. For the first time since childhood, he found himself in the presence of someone who seemed to understand instinctively that grief and joy could coexist, that beauty could emerge from neglect, that love could grow in the most unlikely soil. What passed between them then was nothing so simple as conversation. Rather, it was an exchange of souls conducted in the language of shared understanding, she speaking of her love for simple pleasures that cost nothing but brought immeasurable wealth, he finding himself confessing how the conservatory had remained locked since his mother's death because he could not bear to see her roses wither as she had withered under his father's cold disapproval. When Aurelia quietly asked permission to tend the abandoned garden, offering to restore what had been lost without asking for anything in return, this author believes the Duke fell in love without even recognizing the sensation for what it was. He saw in her offer not the presumption of ownership, but the generous impulse to heal what had been wounded, to bring life back to places where death had lingered too long. The restoration of the conservatory became a metaphor for what was blooming between them, though neither dared acknowledge it directly. Each day, Aurelia would work amongst the neglected plants, whilst the Duke found increasingly transparent excuses to observe her progress. She pruned dead growth with gentle efficiency, enriched the soil with careful attention, and coaxed new life from stems that had seemed beyond salvation. Watching her, the Duke began to wonder if hearts might not respond to similar ministrations, if the careful, patient love she showed to dying roses might work similar magic on souls that had been starved of tenderness. This author observed him standing at the conservatory windows during those weeks, his expression holding the sort of wonder one might reserve for witnessing miracles. The weeks that followed saw a gradual thaw that would have been beautiful to witness had not fate been preparing her cruelest intervention. The Duke began joining Aurelia for morning walks through the restored garden, ostensibly to inspect her progress, but actually to experience the profound peace that seemed to surround her like an invisible aura. He started lingering after dinner to hear her play piano, discovering that her touch upon the keys held a sweetness his mother's playing had never possessed, perhaps because Aurelia played not to impress or please others, but from pure love of the music itself. Her melodies seemed to fill spaces in his soul that he had not known were empty, creating harmony where discord had reigned for decades. Most significantly, he ceased his visits to Mrs. Whitmore's establishment entirely, finding that his wife's gentle presence satisfied hungers he had not known existed whilst creating new ones that only she could fulfill. This author noted that Helena's absence from his life seemed to affect him no more than giving up a particular vintage of wine, pleasant enough in its time, but easily forgotten when one discovered superior fare. This author observed them during social functions and noted how their careful friendship deepened into something approaching true intimacy. The Duke began sharing books from his collection, delighting in Aurelia's thoughtful responses and her willingness to challenge his more pessimistic observations with arguments that revealed both intelligence and genuine moral conviction. She, in turn, revealed glimpses of the passionate woman she had kept hidden beneath her modest exterior. Opinions on social reform that would have scandalized his father, dreams of travel that spoke to an adventurous spirit constrained by circumstance, and a capacity for joy that seemed to illuminate whatever room she graced with her presence. Their first real argument, a heated debate about the nature of human goodness that lasted through an entire evening and left both of them breathless with intellectual exhilaration, marked the moment when politeness gave way to genuine engagement. This author understands that they had been circling each other like dancers learning a complex quadrille, and that first honest conflict revealed the passion that lay beneath their careful courtesy. The Duke discovered that his gentle wife possessed convictions worth defending and the intelligence to defend them with wit rather than mere stubbornness. Aurelia learned that her husband's cynicism masked not cruelty, but rather disappointment in a world that had taught him to expect little goodness, whilst punishing him severely for the vulnerability required to seek it. Most dangerous of all, they began to find excuses for physical proximity that tested the boundaries of their careful restraint. A hand lingering too long when he helped her from carriages, the electric moment when their fingers brushed whilst reaching for the same book, the way they stood perhaps closer than strictly necessary when examining garden plans or household accounts. The electrifying instant when she reached across him for a teacup and he caught her wrist, holding it perhaps a heartbeat longer than propriety permitted, whilst his thumb traced the delicate pulse point there, became a moment of such charged awareness that both fled to separate wings of the house to recover their composure. This author observed them during social functions and noted how they had begun to seek each other unconsciously, his eyes finding her across crowded rooms with the unerring accuracy of a compass needle finding true north, her subtle movements to remain within his sight even when convention demanded they mingle separately with their respective social circles. They had developed their own private language of glances and small smiles, a communication so intimate that other observers began to remark upon the Duke's apparent transformation from notorious libertine to devoted husband. Lady Pembroke was heard to comment that marriage had accomplished what years of maternal scheming had failed to achieve, making the Duke appear almost human in his obvious attachment to his wife. But oh, how cruelly fate had been sharpening her blade whilst love bloomed in ignorance of the storm approaching. Ah, but this author must reveal the serpent lurking in this budding Eden. Helena Rosebottom, you see, had not accepted the Duke's abandonment with the grace one might expect from a woman experienced in the temporary nature of masculine affections. Indeed, she had been cultivating a far richer patron, the Earl of Wessex, whose wife had recently died, leaving him with vast holdings and an appetite for comfort that his considerable purse could abundantly satisfy. This author must pause to illuminate the true scope of Helena's cunning, for what followed was manipulation worthy of the most accomplished political conspirators. She had been corresponding secretly with the Earl for months whilst maintaining her arrangement with the Duke, weaving a web of sympathy and seduction that promised not merely physical pleasure but emotional solace for his bereavement. Helena understood that the Earl's grief made him vulnerable to a woman who could offer not just companionship but the illusion of replacing what he had lost. She studied his late wife's preferences, mimicked her gentle mannerisms when it suited her purposes, and gradually positioned herself as the perfect combination of respectable companionship and passionate comfort that a widowed man might crave. The Earl, flattered by the attention of a woman young enough to be his daughter, yet sophisticated enough to understand his needs, began lavishing upon Helena gifts that far exceeded anything the Duke had ever provided. Jewels that belonged in royal collections, properties that could support small armies, and most importantly, the promise of permanent security that no courtesan could resist when offered by a man of such unlimited wealth. This author shudders to recount what transpired next, for it was manipulation of the most vicious sort, designed to inflict maximum emotional damage while securing Helena's future beyond any possible reversal. Knowing well the Duke's newfound happiness, and perhaps jealous of being so easily replaced in his affections by a mere merchant's daughter, Helena arranged for him to discover her in the Earl's bed precisely when she knew his former passion for her might still be rekindled by the sight of what he had lost. The message that summoned him was a masterpiece of calculated cruelty, written in Helena's distinctive hand and delivered by a street urchin whose dirty face and urgent manner suggested genuine emergency. It spoke of desperate circumstances requiring his immediate assistance, of dangers that threatened her very survival, of debts that could only be settled through his intervention. Having received no word from her since their final parting, and perhaps feeling guilty about his abrupt abandonment of their arrangement without proper explanation or adequate provision for her future security, the Duke rode through London's midnight streets like a man possessed by demons of regret and misplaced chivalry. What he discovered in Helena's chambers was a tableau designed to inflict maximum emotional damage whilst demonstrating her superior tactical position. The Earl, portly and graying, but wearing the satisfied expression of a man well-pleasured and thoroughly content with his investment, lounged in post-coital contentment, whilst Helena reclined beside him, wearing emeralds that could have purchased small kingdoms. The conversation that followed revealed layers of deception that this author can barely bring herself to record. Helena's urgent crisis had been entirely fabricated. Her supposed dangers were nothing more than theatrical devices designed to lure the Duke into witnessing her apparent happiness with another man. Most crushing of all, she revealed that their affair had been progressing for months, that she had been comparing her lover's generosity with mercantile precision, and that the Duke's recent neglect had merely confirmed what she had long suspected, that his affections were as changeable as his notorious reputation suggested. But this author observed something in the Duke's response that suggested Helena had miscalculated the depth of change that Aurelia's influence had wrought within him. Rather than the explosive jealousy she had anticipated, rather than the desperate pleading she had hoped to inspire, he simply stood there, absorbing her betrayal with the sort of terrible calm that suggested not devastation, but rather a profound shift in understanding. The confrontation that followed was everything Helena had calculated it would be, yet nothing she had truly expected. She painted herself as the wounded party with performances that would have done credit to Drury Lane, claimed the Duke had cast her aside without thought to her feelings or future security, and suggested that perhaps, if he truly loved her, he might prove it through more substantial means than the mere trinkets and temporary arrangements that had satisfied him previously. The Earl, thoroughly besotted and eager to secure Helena's exclusive attentions whilst humiliating a rival whose youth and title he secretly envied, proposed a wager that would determine her future permanently. A single night at the gaming tables, winner takes all. The stakes were designed to ensure maximum humiliation regardless of outcome, and to demonstrate once and for all which man valued Helena's company enough to risk everything for her favor. Gentle listeners, steel yourselves for what follows, for this author can barely recount it without her heart breaking anew. The Duke, faced with this challenge to his masculine pride and confused by the resurrection of feelings he thought he had buried, found himself agreeing to terms that would have horrified him in any rational moment. But this author must record here what truly drove the Duke to such desperate measures, for it was not mere wounded vanity, but rather a crisis of identity that threatened to destroy everything he had begun to build with Aurelia. The confrontation with Helena had awakened his deepest fears about the nature of love itself. Was the growing tenderness he felt for his wife merely another form of the obsession that had bound him to Helena? Was he capable of genuine love, or only of various forms of sophisticated selfishness? The wager became, in his tormented mind, a test not merely of his feelings for Helena, but of his worthiness for Aurelia's growing affection. If he won Helena back, it would prove that his baser nature remained unchanged, and that Aurelia deserved better than a husband who could be so easily swayed by carnal appeal. If he lost, perhaps it would free him to pursue the pure love his wife offered without the contamination of his sordid past. Such was the twisted logic of a man whose father had taught him that love was weakness, that emotional investment led only to pain, that caring deeply about another person was a luxury no Thornberry could afford. The Duke's agreement to the wager was not an act of passion, but of self-destruction, a desperate attempt to prove to himself that he remained the cold, controlled man his father had created rather than the vulnerable, hopeful creature that Aurelia's love was slowly coaxing into existence. The stakes were precisely calibrated to ensure lasting damage. If the Duke won, Helena would abandon the Earl immediately and return to their former arrangement, but only if he publicly acknowledged their relationship and installed her as his acknowledged mistress despite his recent marriage, ensuring that Aurelia would be humiliated before all of London society. If he lost, Helena would become the Earl's permanent companion, and he would return to his wife with the knowledge that he had gambled away his last chance at the passion he had once believed he needed to survive. One can only imagine Aurelia's devastation when she learned of this wager, not from her husband, who lacked the courage to confess his faithlessness, but from the household gossip that such scandals inevitably generate. Mrs. Henley, whose loyalty to the family extended to protecting her young mistress from unnecessary pain, had attempted to keep the news from reaching Aurelia's ears. But secrets in great houses have a way of seeping through walls like dampness, and by evening, every servant knew that their master was spending the night determining whether his wife or his former mistress held the greater claim upon his affections. This author has it on good authority that Aurelia spent that terrible night standing at her bedroom window, watching the lights of London flicker like distant stars, whilst contemplating how her heart had become so thoroughly invested in a man who could stake their marriage on a game of cards. The poor girl's anguish was compounded by her understanding of what the Duke's actions revealed about his true feelings. That he would risk everything for another woman's love proved how little their growing intimacy had meant to him, how easily he could cast aside the tender shoots of affection they had been cultivating in favor of a passion he considered more genuine. Mrs. Whitmore found her mistress some time before dawn, weeping over a half-written letter of farewell with the sort of quiet despair that cuts deeper than any dramatic outburst. This author must record here one of the most heart-wrenching scenes she has ever witnessed through second-hand account. Aurelia explaining to the loyal housekeeper that she had always known about Helena's existence, had accepted it as part of marrying a man of the Duke's reputation, but could not bear to remain where she would always be compared to a love her husband considered more authentic than anything she could offer. The conversation revealed depths of understanding that impressed even this author. Aurelia acknowledged that she had no legal or moral right to object to her husband's past liaisons, that she had entered their marriage knowing it was a business arrangement rather than a romantic attachment. What wounded her was not the existence of a former mistress, but the discovery that her husband still considered that purchased passion more genuine than the freely given love that had been growing in his own home. Most remarkably, she took responsibility for what she perceived as her own failure to inspire in him the sort of desire that might have made their arrangement into something approaching genuine partnership. This author finds such selfless grace in the face of abandonment both admirable and heartbreaking, for it revealed a spirit noble enough to blame herself rather than condemn the man whose choices had wounded her so deeply. Yet beneath that gentle acceptance lay a core of steel that poverty and hardship had forged within her. Aurelia was not fleeing in hysteria or spite, but making a calculated decision that her dignity was worth more than security, that honest poverty was preferable to the humiliation of remaining where she was neither valued nor desired. In packing her modest belongings, she was not surrendering to despair, but reclaiming the strength that had carried her family through their darkest hours. What transpired in that smoke-filled gaming hell would become legend amongst the gambling set for years to come, though this author suspects that none who witnessed it understood the true stakes being wagered that night. The Duke arrived at the appointed hour, wearing the expression of a man attending his own execution, not from fear of losing, but from the growing certainty that winning might prove even more catastrophic to the fragile happiness he had been building. The gaming room at White's had been transformed for the occasion into an arena where reputations would be built or destroyed with each turn of the cards. The Earl, flushed with wine and confident in his superior position, had invited several witnesses to observe his triumph over a younger rival. Helena, draped in jewels that caught candlelight like captured stars, played her role as prize to perfection, beautiful, desirable, and apparently worth any risk to possess. This author understands that the Duke played with the desperate intensity of a man wagering his soul, yet beneath his apparent concentration lay a growing awareness that the woman he was fighting to reclaim had become a stranger to him. 3 months of Aurelia's gentle presence had altered his perception so completely that Helena's theatrical beauty now seemed artificial, her practiced passion hollow, her calculated charm obvious in ways it had never been before. Hand after hand, the Duke's superior skill at the tables asserted itself. He won with the mechanical precision that had made him feared amongst London's gaming establishments. Yet this author has learned that each victory felt increasingly like defeat. For with every card that fell in his favor, he moved closer to a prize he no longer truly wanted, whilst moving further from the woman whose absence was becoming more painful than Helena's presence had ever been pleasurable. The final hand arrived with the sort of dramatic inevitability that this author suspects Providence reserves for moments when mortals require education in the true nature of their hearts. The Duke held cards that should have guaranteed victory. Indeed, mathematical probability suggested that defeat was virtually impossible. Yet when that final card was revealed, the Queen of Hearts, how bitterly appropriate, Fortune abandoned him as completely as if the fates themselves had intervened to teach him the difference between winning and succeeding. This author must pause here to reveal what the Duke learned only in that moment of apparent defeat. Helena's passion had never been for him at all, but for the lifestyle his wealth could provide. The Earl's superior fortune had long since claimed her true allegiance, and she had orchestrated the entire evening not from jealousy or wounded affection, but from simple greed, married to a desire for revenge against a man who had dared to find happiness elsewhere. The revelation came through the Earl's drunken boasting as the cards were gathered and witnesses began to disperse. "Helena," he declared with the crude satisfaction of a man who believes himself victor in more than mere gambling, had been warming his bed for months, whilst allowing the Duke to believe himself her sole protector. Every gift the Duke had lavished upon her had been immediately displayed to the Earl as proof of her desirability and his rival's inferior generosity. Every confidence the Duke had shared in moments of post-coital vulnerability had been repeated for the Earl's amusement, like scenes from a particularly entertaining theatrical production. Most crushing of all, every moment of intimacy the Duke had treasured as evidence of Helena's genuine feeling had been discussed and dissected between her and the Earl like items in a merchant's inventory. His vulnerabilities had become their private entertainment. His trust had been transformed into their shared jest, and his belief in her affection had provided them with months of superior amusement at his expense. The Duke's response to this intelligence was, this author understands, a thing of terrible beauty that spoke to how profoundly Aurelia's influence had already changed him. Rather than the explosive rage Helena had anticipated and perhaps hoped to provoke, rather than the desperate pleading she might have used to further humiliate him, he simply smiled, an expression so cold and final that even Helena shivered despite her supposed triumph and the Earl's protective presence. He congratulated the Earl on his prize with perfect courtesy, wished Helena joy of her choice with sincerity that suggested genuine relief rather than bitter disappointment, and departed with his dignity intact whilst his illusions lay in ruins. This author suspects that in that moment, walking away from a game he had lost, but a delusion he had finally abandoned, the Duke experienced his first taste of genuine freedom in decades. But oh, gentle listeners, it was during that endless carriage ride through London's sleeping streets that our Duke experienced what this author can only describe as a complete reformation of understanding. For you see, in losing Helena so completely, not merely her person, but any lingering illusion about the nature of what they had shared, he gained perfect clarity about what he had been slowly learning to value far above mere passion. The revelation struck him with the force of physical blow as his carriage wheels clicked against cobblestones, still wet from evening rain. Helena had offered him the intoxication of lust, disguised as love, demanding, possessive, ultimately hollow, because it depended upon his wealth rather than his worthiness. She had required him to be the duke, the title, the fortune, the reputation for exciting danger that made bedding him a triumph worth boasting about to other lovers. Aurelia had given him something infinitely more precious, the gift of being valued simply as a man. She had never asked him to be more charming, more generous, more exciting than he naturally was. Instead, she had found genuine pleasure in his company when he offered nothing but honesty, had shown interest in his thoughts when they were neither particularly witty nor especially profound, had responded to his presence with the sort of quiet joy that suggested she truly enjoyed the person he was beneath all his carefully constructed facades. The Duke realized with crushing clarity that he had been confusing the fever of obsession with the warmth of genuine affection, mistaking possession for love and performance for authentic connection. Helena had made him feel powerful through her apparent need for his protection and wealth. Aurelia made him feel peaceful through her simple presence, valued through her quiet appreciation of qualities he had never considered particularly admirable, and whole in ways he had never imagined possible. This author understands that the Duke spent those dark miles remembering every kindness Aurelia had shown him, every moment of genuine warmth she had offered to a man who had given her nothing but cold duty in return. He recalled how she had never once reproached him for his emotional distance, never demanded explanations for his absences, never expressed anything but gratitude for courtesies that any decent husband should have provided as a matter of course. Most painfully, he remembered the growing light in her eyes during their recent weeks of tentative friendship, the way her face had begun to brighten when he entered rooms, the soft sigh of contentment she made when they sat together in comfortable silence. He had been so focused on fighting his growing attachment to her that he had failed to recognize and cherish the miracle of her attachment to him. By the time his carriage reached the familiar gates of Thornbury House, the Duke had realized what this author had observed from the beginning, that real love had been waiting in his own home whilst he chased its counterfeit in purchased embraces. More than that, he understood that in risking Aurelia's regard for Helena's hollow passion, he had proven himself unworthy of the genuine devotion that had been offered to him so freely. The cruel irony was not lost upon him that Helena's calculated betrayal, intended to demonstrate his fundamental unworthiness of genuine affection, had instead provided him with the clarity necessary to recognize and properly value what he had been carelessly endangering. In attempting to destroy his happiness, she had inadvertently shown him where true happiness actually resided. But oh, the scene that awaited him. For Aurelia, believing herself abandoned for a beautiful courtesan whose charms had proven more compelling than the quiet devotion of a convenient wife, had spent the night composing a letter of farewell that stood as testament to the nobility of spirit that made her worthy of any man's complete devotion. This author has read that letter, preserved now among the Duke's most treasured possessions, and it reveals a character so generous that it shames lesser mortals into recognition of their own selfishness. She expressed no bitterness toward the Duke for following his heart, no resentment at being cast aside for another woman's superior attractions. Instead, she thanked him for the kindness he had shown her during their brief marriage, acknowledged that their union had been arranged for practical rather than romantic reasons, and wished him joy in whatever future he chose to pursue with the woman who had captured his deepest affections. Most heartbreaking of all, she begged his forgiveness for the failure of their union, taking upon herself the blame for being unable to inspire in him the sort of passion that might have made their arrangement into something approaching genuine happiness. Such selfless grace in the face of abandonment, gentle listeners, reveals the sort of character that transforms ordinary women into queens of men's hearts, and shames those men into becoming worthy of the love they have been offered. She intended to return to her father's house at dawn, preferring honest poverty to the humiliation of competing with a husband's true love for even the smallest portion of his regard. Mrs. Whitmore discovered her in the entrance hall as the first light crept through the windows, valise in hand and tear-stained cheeks bearing witness to her night of anguish, dressed in the same simple gown she had worn upon her arrival, as if symbolically shedding the grandeur that had never truly belonged to her. When the Duke burst through his own front doors, like a man fleeing the very demons of hell, the tableau that greeted him was more devastating than any sight that had ever met his eyes. Here stood a woman who had never asked him for anything beyond basic human kindness, who had brought beauty and peace to his wounded home, who had loved him quietly and completely whilst expecting nothing in return, and he had nearly cast her aside for a woman who valued him only in pounds sterling and the amusement his humiliation could provide. The scene that unfolded in that marble foyer became the foundation of everything that followed. This author has it from Mrs. Whitmore that when the Duke saw his wife prepared to leave him forever, something within him simply shattered. Not his pride. That had been demolished in Helena's chambers by the Earl's crude revelations. Not his heart. That had been remaking itself slowly under Aurelia's influence for weeks without his recognition. Rather, it was the last vestige of his father's cruel teaching that love was weakness, that emotional investment led only to pain, that caring deeply about another person was a luxury no Thornbury could afford. What followed, gentle listeners, was a courtship more intense than any this author has chronicled, for it had all the urgency of a man racing against time to win what he had nearly lost forever, whilst carrying the terrible knowledge that he had no right to succeed. The Duke, throwing aside every lesson his father had beaten into him about emotional restraint, pursued his own wife with the single-minded determination of a man who had glimpsed paradise and found himself willing to do anything to prove worthy of entry. The Duke fell to his knees before his departing wife, a gesture so shocking that Mrs. Whitmore nearly dropped her tea service and required several minutes to recover her professional composure. This author understands that he began to speak then with an honesty that stripped away years of careful emotional armor like acid eating through steel, confessing everything. His arrangement with Helena, his confusion about the nature of love, his terror that the growing feelings he harbored for Aurelia made him vulnerable in ways his father had taught him to fear above all else. But most remarkably, he spoke of what these past months with her had taught him about the difference between wanting and loving, between possession and partnership, between the fever of temporary lust and the deeper satisfaction of true companionship that grows stronger rather than weaker with familiarity. Helena had made him feel powerful through her apparent need for his protection and largesse. Aurelia made him feel peaceful through her simple presence, valued through her quiet appreciation of qualities he had never considered particularly admirable, and whole in ways that had nothing to do with his wealth or position or reputation. This author must record here that Aurelia's response to these confessions revealed the true steel beneath her gentle exterior. She did not immediately forgive, did not fall weeping into his arms, did not demonstrate the sort of feminine weakness that might have allowed him to believe his redemption could be easily purchased. Instead, she listened with the careful attention of a judge weighing evidence, asked questions that revealed she understood the psychological forces that had driven him to such self-destructive behavior, and ultimately made it clear that forgiveness would need to be earned through actions rather than merely requested through words. What followed was the most extraordinary courtship this author has ever witnessed, a man pursuing his own wife with the dedication of a supplicant seeking divine favor. The Duke canceled all social engagements to spend every waking moment learning who Aurelia truly was beneath her careful composure, discovering layers of complexity that his previous indifference had prevented him from recognizing. He learned that she read Greek philosophy for pleasure, finding in Stoic principles guidance for accepting circumstances beyond her control whilst maintaining dignity in the face of hardship. He discovered that she had taught herself botanical illustration during the long afternoons of their reduced circumstances, creating detailed drawings of wildflowers that transformed weeds into works of art through the simple expedient of careful observation and patient love. Most wonderfully, he found that the gentle woman he had dismissed as unremarkable contained depths of passion that made Helena's theatrical displays seem shallow as puddles reflecting sky without containing any. When Aurelia spoke of injustices she had witnessed, when she described her dreams for a more equitable society where children need not suffer for their parents' misfortunes, her eyes blazed with conviction that would have impressed social reformers and revolutionaries alike. The Duke's courtship of his own wife became the most talked about development of the season, though none dared comment upon it directly in his presence. This author observed them during their first public appearance following their reconciliation, a performance of Mozart at Covent Garden, where they sat closer together than strictly necessary, where his attention never wandered from her face, even during the most acclaimed areas, where her smiles held a radiance that made other women seem dim by comparison. Their newfound intimacy extended beyond mere public displays into the private moments that truly define a marriage. The Duke began sharing stories of his childhood that he had never told another living soul. Not the brutal lessons his father had administered, which Aurelia had intuited from his behavior, but the treasured memories of his mother that he had locked away like precious relics too fragile for frequent handling. He spoke of how she had sung to him during storms, her voice weaving melodies that transformed frightening thunder into lullabies that carried him safely into sleep. How she had read him stories of knights and princesses, heroes and quests, planting seeds of romantic imagination that had survived even his father's determined efforts to crush them. How she had promised, in whispers shared during stolen moments when his father was absent, that someday he would find love worth any sacrifice and joy that no authority could confiscate. Aurelia, in turn, revealed the dreams she had harbored during their family's decline, not for wealth or position, though she would have been grateful for security, but for the sort of partnership her parents had shared before debt and desperation poisoned their happiness. She spoke of wanting to create a home where laughter echoed through corridors like music, where children might grow up feeling cherished rather than burdened by expectations, where love was not a luxury to be rationed, but the foundation upon which everything else was built. This author must record here the particularly beautiful transformation that occurred in the conservatory during these weeks of rediscovered courtship. What had begun as Aurelia's gentle restoration of neglected plants evolved into a shared sanctuary where both Duke and Duchess could tend not merely roses, but the delicate growth of their own relationship. They spent hours there together, she teaching him the patience required to nurture living things back to health. He sharing memories of his mother that each new bloom helped resurrect from the grave of enforced forgetfulness where his father's cruelty had buried them. The conservatory became their private world where titles and social expectations could be forgotten in favor of the simple pleasure of working together toward common goals. The morning he found Aurelia singing to herself whilst tending his mother's restored roses, this author believes our Duke finally understood what his father's relentless cruelty had cost him. Here was a woman who could bring life back to gardens that had accepted death, who could make music from silence, who could love a wounded man without asking him to be anything other than his authentic self. When he told her of Helena, confessing everything with the sort of brutal honesty that strips a man's soul bare and leaves it exposed to whatever judgment might follow, she listened without interruption and without the condemnation he knew he deserved. Her forgiveness, when it came, was not the quick absolution of someone eager to forget painful truths, but the considered mercy of a woman who understood that people must be judged by their intentions rather than merely their actions. The physical consummation of their marriage, when it finally occurred some weeks later, was remarkable not for its passion, though this author suspects that ran deep enough to scandalize even libertines, but for its tenderness. Helena had taught the Duke about desire. Aurelia taught him about intimacy. The difference, gentle listeners, is the difference between fire that burns bright and brief, consuming everything it touches, and warmth that sustains through the longest winters whilst nurturing growth rather than destruction. Their first kiss, which occurred in that same conservatory where understanding had first bloomed between them, was witnessed only by the roses and this author's imagination. But one suspects it held all the sweetness that the Duke had never known existed, all the promise of healing that Aurelia had always represented, and all the desperate gratitude of a man who had been granted a love he had never deserved, yet somehow been deemed worthy to receive. The weeks that followed, transformed Thornbury House from a monument to grief into a haven of quiet joy that impressed even this author with its completeness. The Duke, having finally tasted genuine affection, proved as devoted a husband as he had been dissolute a bachelor. He wooed his wife with the patience of a gardener, coaxing blooms from reluctant soil, and she responded by revealing the passionate woman she had always been beneath her careful propriety. This author observed them during the season's final ball, noting how they moved together with the synchronicity of partners who had learned each other's rhythms both on the dance floor and in the more intimate chambers of their shared life. When the Duke waltzed with his Duchess, holding her perhaps closer than strict propriety demanded, whilst gazing into her eyes with an intensity that made observers blush for witnessing such private communion in public, it became clear that theirs had become the sort of love that makes other marriages seem like pale imitations of the genuine article. The transformation extended beyond their private happiness into their public life as well. The Duke, once known for his cutting wit and emotional coldness, became an advocate for social reforms that would help families like the Whitmores avoid the desperation that had nearly destroyed them. His speeches in the House of Lords, previously notable only for their sardonic dismissal of humanitarian concerns, began to demonstrate a compassion that startled his peers and earned him respect from quarters that had previously written him off as irredeemably selfish. Aurelia, no longer the timid merchant's daughter grateful for any scrap of attention, blossomed into a duchess whose grace and genuine kindness made her one of the Tun's most beloved figures. She established charitable schools for children whose circumstances mirrored her own former poverty, created opportunities for young women to develop skills that might save them from destitution, and used her position to open doors for families struggling against the sort of financial ruin that had once threatened her own. Their partnership became legendary not merely for its romantic intensity, but for its practical effectiveness in addressing social ills that other nobles preferred to ignore. This author observed them working together on charitable projects with the sort of seamless cooperation that suggested they had found in each other not merely lovers, but true partners in every sense of the word. This author is delighted to report that when the Duke's heir was born some 11 months later, His Grace wept openly, not from his father's legacy of emotional constraint, but from pure joy at holding his son in arms that finally knew how to offer tenderness instead of only strength. The child, this author predicts with considerable confidence, will grow up understanding that love is not weakness, but rather the greatest strength any human being can possess. More remarkably still, the Duke insisted that his son be raised with the sort of emotional nurturing that he himself had been denied. No harsh tutors, no punishments designed to break spirit, no lessons that love must be earned through perfection rather than freely given to children simply because they exist and are worthy of affection. The irony was not lost on this author that Helena's calculated betrayal, intended to demonstrate the Duke's fundamental unworthiness of genuine affection and perhaps to punish him for daring to find happiness elsewhere, instead provided him with the clarity necessary to recognize and claim the love that had been growing under his own roof. In attempting to destroy his chances of genuine happiness, she had inadvertently secured them forever. The final twist in this tale came some 2 years later when this author learned that Helena herself had been abandoned by the Earl once he grew bored with her company and began pursuing younger entertainment. Without the Duke's steady support, or any man foolish enough to believe in her performances of affection, she had descended rapidly through London's hierarchy of purchased pleasure until she disappeared entirely from the circles where her beauty had once commanded premium prices. This author mentions Helena's fate not from any desire for revenge, though justice does seem to have its own elegant timing, but rather to illustrate how completely the Duke's priorities had shifted. When news of her circumstances reached him, his response was not satisfaction at her downfall, but rather a quiet instruction to his man of business to ensure she received a modest pension sufficient to keep her from complete destitution. Such magnanimity, gentle listeners, reveals how thoroughly love had transformed a man who once would have considered revenge not merely justified, but necessary. And so, gentle listeners, another tale reaches its blessed conclusion. From the ashes of dissolution rose a love that burned truer than any fire, proving once again that the heart's capacity for redemption exceeds even this author's considerable imagination. The Duke learned that true passion grows not from desperation, but from devotion, not from possession, but from partnership, not from the fever of want, but from the deep satisfaction of being genuinely known and valued for one's authentic self, rather than one's carefully constructed masks. If this chronicle of passion and redemption has stirred your romantic sensibilities, do remember to like and subscribe for more tales from the Ton's most devoted observer. Until our next encounter, remember, the greatest scandals often lead to the greatest happiness, and sometimes we must lose everything false to discover what was always true, waiting patiently for our recognition. Your devoted chronicler, Lady Ravenswood.